My name is Serena Caldwell, and I am 35 years old. I should have known my sister would try something the moment she realized I wasn't going to hand over thousands of dollars for her Hawaii trip. I just didn't expect her to do it in the middle of my own wedding reception, in front of nearly 100 guests, using a $2,700 cake as her weapon. The first hint came 3 weeks before the wedding. I was at work, buried in spreadsheets and last-minute emails, when my phone lit up with my sister Lila's name. She was bubbling with excitement in that performative way she used whenever she wanted something. She launched straight into describing a once-in-a-lifetime vacation she was planning with her new boyfriend, Evan, a man who, during our first meeting, had asked me how much I made before he'd even bothered to ask what I did for a living. She talked about first-class flights, a luxury resort, dolphin swims, helicopter tours over volcanoes, and champagne sunsets like she was narrating a commercial. I listened, assuming she was just sharing news, until she said it as casually as if she were asking to borrow a sweater. I'd be covering most of the costs. Not lending, not splitting, paying. I told her I could contribute something, but I wasn't footing the entire bill. There was a pause, just long enough to register. Then she said she'd think about it and hung up. I remember sitting there staring at my phone, that familiar knot of unease forming in my stomach. Lila had never handled no well, especially not from me. But with the wedding approaching and 100 other things demanding my attention, I pushed the feeling aside. That was my mistake. The wedding day itself started perfectly. The ceremony was smooth, heartfelt, and warm. And my fiancée Danielle looked at me like I was the only person in the room. Even Lila seemed unusually pleasant, laughing with relatives she normally ignored, joking with my friends. It was almost convincing. Almost. When it came time for the cake cutting, the room gathered around, phones out, smiles ready. That cake meant something to us. It was custom designed by a bakery Daniel loved, flown in at extra cost, layered with flavors we'd chosen together. 3 tiers of delicate detail, the kind of cake you photograph before you touch. That's when I noticed Lila standing too close. She rested her hand on the table, grinning at me across the room. And then, with a deliberate flick, the entire cake toppled forward. It hit the floor with a wet, heavy thud. The room froze. She looked at me, still smiling, and said she'd accidentally knocked it over. Then she told me cheerfully I'd have to order another one. Before I could even speak, my mother stepped in. "Don't be selfish," she said to me. And in that moment, everything became clear. The room didn't erupt the way you'd expect when something that expensive and symbolic hits the floor. There were no gasps, no cries, no dramatic reactions. Instead, there was this awful, suspended silence, the kind that presses on your ears until you become hyper-aware of every small sound. A fork clinked against a plate. Someone shifted in their chair. A couple of guests exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances and then looked away, as if pretending they hadn't just watched the centerpiece of our reception get destroyed on purpose. I stood there with Daniel beside me, his hand tightening around mine in that instinctive way people do when they don't know whether to step in or let you handle it. Frosting smeared into the carpet like a crime scene. The top tier had rolled onto its side, leaving a trail of white icing and crushed flowers. It was surreal, like watching a slow-motion accident you can't stop. Lila didn't look shocked. She looked satisfied. "Oops," she said lightly, still smiling, eyes locked on mine. "Guess you'll have to get another one." It was said like a joke, like the kind of clumsy accident you laugh off, as if a $2,700 custom cake, flown in and designed to match our entire wedding theme, was interchangeable with something from the grocery store bakery down the street. I opened my mouth, not even sure what I was going to say, when my mother stepped forward. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look at the cake. She didn't look at Daniel. She looked straight at me. "Don't be selfish," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "It's just a cake." Something inside me snapped into focus so cleanly it almost felt calm. The embarrassment, the expense, the deliberate way Lila had done it, the fact that my mother had immediately turned on me instead of asking her what she'd done. It all collapsed into one simple truth. This wasn't an accident. This was punishment. For not paying for the Hawaii trip. I could feel heat rising in my face, not from anger exactly, but from the humiliation of being scolded in front of nearly 100 people like I was the one who'd caused the problem. Lila leaned back against a chair, arms crossed now, watching the scene unfold like it was better entertainment than the DJ. Daniel leaned closer to me. "Do you want me to say something?" he murmured. I shook my head once, slowly. Not because I didn't want to defend myself, but because I suddenly understood that defending myself in that moment would only feed what they wanted. A reaction, a scene, proof that I was, as they like to say, too sensitive. So I swallowed it. We finished the reception without a cake. Someone cut the music early. The venue staff quietly tried to clean the mess, while guests pretended to laugh a little too loudly at conversations that weren't funny. I smiled for photos I didn't want to be in. I thanked people for coming. I hugged relatives who avoided meeting my eyes. All the while I could feel Lila watching me, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. By the time the last guest left and we retreated to our hotel suite, my face hurt from holding that expression. Daniel loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the bed, letting out a long breath like he'd been holding it all night. I peeled off my shoes and sank into the armchair by the window, staring at my phone without really seeing it. "You don't have to let this go," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. And I did know. But letting it go wasn't the same as letting it continue. The image of Lila's hand flicking the cake table replayed in my mind, over and over. The way my mother had jumped in to shame me. The way neither of them had even pretended to feel bad. This wasn't about dessert. It was a message. Do what we want, or we will embarrass you. They thought I'd swallow it like I always had. Smile, smooth it over, and keep paying. They had no idea how wrong they were. That night, long after the hallway outside our hotel room went silent, I sat alone in the corner of the suite with my phone in my hand, the glow of the screen reflecting off the window like a second, colder version of myself staring back. Daniel was already asleep, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the only sound in the room besides the faint hum of traffic far below. He looked peaceful, exhausted in the way only a wedding day can exhaust you, and I didn't wake him. This wasn't his fight. It had never been his fight. I replayed the moment again. Lila's smile, the thud of the cake, my mother's voice telling me not to be selfish. I realized I wasn't shaking. I wasn't pacing. I wasn't even angry in the way I used to be when my sister crossed a line. I felt focused, sharpened, like a switch had been flipped and every distraction fell away. And then I remembered something important. Months earlier, when Lila was first planning her Hawaii trip, she had insisted that I handle the booking. She'd framed it like a favor she was doing me. I had better credit, better travel rewards, better access to deals. It would just be easier if everything went through my account, she'd said, and I hadn't questioned it. I'd booked trips for family before. It had always been easier to keep things centralized. What I hadn't fully processed at the time was what that meant. Every reservation, every payment, every cancellation, all of it was under my name. I opened the travel app and pulled up her itinerary. It was exactly as extravagant as she'd described. First-class flights for 2, 7 nights at an oceanfront resort with a private balcony. Prepaid excursions stacked on top of each other like she was trying to buy a personality. Dolphin swim, helicopter tour over volcanoes, catamaran dinner cruise, a private waterfall hike. The total sat just over $9,000. $9,000 she had fully expected me to cover. The urge to cancel everything immediately burned hot and fast, but I forced myself to slow down. Lila was impulsive, but she wasn't stupid. If she found out too soon, she'd scramble. She'd call airlines. She'd cry to my mother. She'd try to salvage pieces of the trip before the refunds processed. I didn't want her to have that chance. I wanted the window to close. So I waited. I scrolled through the photos she'd been sending to the family group chat for weeks. Pictures of infinity pools and white sand beaches, her captions dripping with entitlement and anticipation. I imagined her lying in bed somewhere in the hotel, smug and satisfied, convinced she'd won, convinced that knocking over my wedding cake had worked. At 2:47 a.m., I stood up, took my laptop into the bathroom, and shut the door so the light wouldn't wake Daniel. Sitting on the closed toilet lid, I logged into the account and began dismantling the trip piece by piece. Flights first, canceled. Confirmation email sent to me. Resort next, canceled. Refund initiated. Excursions followed, one by one. Helicopter ride gone. Dolphin swim erased. Dinner cruise wiped clean. It took less than 20 minutes to make the entire vacation disappear. Before closing the browser, I changed the login credentials. New password. New security questions. If Lila reminded herself of my existence and tried to get back in, she'd hit a wall. The only proof the trip had ever existed would be the screenshots she'd already sent around, and those wouldn't get her anywhere. When I finally crawled back into bed, the city lights blinking through the curtains, I didn't feel guilt. I felt still. Like a long-running noise in my head had finally gone quiet. The next morning, my phone didn't ring once. It vibrated, over and over again. I let it sit there on the nightstand while I showered, dressed, and poured myself a cup of coffee. When I finally looked at it, the screen was lit up with missed calls. 11 from Lila, 4 from my mother. 2 from an unfamiliar number I didn't need to guess belonged to Evan, suddenly very interested in speaking to me now that his luxury vacation had evaporated. The pounding on the door came next. Not polite knocking, not tentative taps. Full force hits that rattled the latch. "Fix it!" Lila shouted from the hallway. "I know you canceled it. You can't do this to us." I took a slow sip of coffee before opening the door just enough to see her. She looked wrecked. Sweatpants, oversized hoodie, hair pulled back in a way that suggested she hadn't slept at all. She shoved her phone toward me, the airline cancellation notice glaring in red across the screen. Evan stood behind her, leaning against the wall, pretending to scroll through his phone like this didn't involve him. She launched into her explanation without waiting for me to speak. Flights gone. Resort released the room. Excursions wiped. She said it like I'd made some clerical error and just needed to reverse it before the system finalized. I didn't respond. I just let her talk until her words started tumbling over each other and the panic crept into her voice. That's when my mother appeared at the end of the hallway, moving fast, face already set for battle. "This is going too far," she snapped, pointing at me. "You don't punish family over petty things." Petty. That word almost made me laugh. I stepped fully into the hallway, coffee still in hand, and looked at both of them calmly. "No more trips," I said. "No more emergencies that somehow require my credit card. No more humiliating me and calling it a joke." Lila's eyes filled, but it wasn't remorse. It was rage. The rage of someone who just realized the free ride had ended. The hallway went quiet after I closed the door, but I knew this wasn't over. Lila never retreated without trying another angle. And sure enough, it didn't take long. It started with texts. Not from Lila or my mother at first, but from people I hadn't heard from in months. Cousins. An aunt who only surfaced when something was wrong. A family friend who liked to pretend neutrality while quietly collecting gossip. "Is it true you canceled your sister's vacation? Your mom says Lila is devastated. Is this really about a cake?" The speed of it was impressive. Lila had moved fast, spinning her version of the story before I'd even finished my second cup of coffee. In her telling, I wasn't a woman who had just been humiliated at her own wedding. I was a vindictive sister who'd ruined a once-in-a-lifetime trip out of spite. No mention of the $2,700 cake. No mention of the months of entitlement. No mention of her expecting me to bankroll a luxury vacation without even pretending to ask. By lunchtime, it felt like the family had already decided who the villain was supposed to be. I didn't respond to a single message. Daniel noticed before I said anything. "They're circling," he said quietly, glancing at my phone lighting up again. "Do you want me to handle this?" "No," I replied. "Let it play out." I didn't know exactly how it would, but I had a feeling Lila wouldn't stop at private guilt trips. She needed an audience. She always had. The confirmation came a few hours later, in the form of a blurry photo sent by one of my groomsmen, Kyle. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I zoomed in. Lila and Evan were standing in the middle of the airport departure hall, holding a giant piece of cardboard with thick black letters scrawled across it. "Help, we're stranded." Kyle was there for a work trip and had recognized her immediately. He overheard them telling anyone who would listen that their vacation had been sabotaged by a cruel family member who controlled their finances. They were asking for help, sympathy, donations, maybe even someone willing to post their story online. And someone did. Within an hour, the photo was circulating on a local travel page. At first, the comments were sympathetic. People talked about how awful it was to be betrayed by family, how no one deserved that kind of treatment. Then someone recognized her. A guest from my wedding had uploaded a short video the night before, a shaky clip of the exact moment Lila knocked over the cake, smiling as she did it. It wasn't meant to go viral. It was just a guest recording what they thought was an awkward moment. But the internet connected the dots. This is the same woman who ruined her sister's wedding cake. Why is she relying on family to pay for her vacation? She bragged about never paying for trips because family always comes through. Screenshots surfaced. Old posts. comments she'd made, laughing about how she'd never paid full price for anything because she didn't have to. The tone shifted fast. By evening, the airport photo was gone, taken down after the comments turned brutal. But it didn't matter. It had already been shared thousands of times. The narrative Lila had tried to control had slipped completely out of her hands. My phone buzzed again, this time with different messages. Wow, didn't know the whole story. Sorry, I jumped to conclusions. That cake video is yikes. No one outright apologized. They never do. But the pressure evaporated. The same relatives who'd rushed to tell me I'd gone too far now went quiet, hoping they could pretend they hadn't picked a side at all. Lila didn't call me that night. She didn't call the next morning either. When she finally did reach out 2 days later, it wasn't to apologize, it was to talk things through and move forward, which was her way of asking what I planned to do about the mess she'd made for herself online. I told her calmly that I hadn't posted the video, but even if I had, I wouldn't take it down. I reminded her that I didn't humiliate her in front of 100 guests. She did that herself. For once, she had nothing to say. The fallout didn't stop there. The boyfriend, Evan, disappeared not long after. From what I heard, he didn't sign up to be publicly exposed as a grown man waiting for someone else to pay for his vacations. Their relationship fizzled within a month, quietly and without ceremony. And something else happened, something I hadn't expected. The calls stopped. No more emergency requests. No more, can you spot me this time messages. No more guilt-laced reminders that family helps family. The moment I stopped giving, the demands evaporated. For the first time in years, my life felt calm. I thought the chapter was closed. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every way, when the email arrived. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Daniel, half listening as he talked about a meeting he had later that afternoon when I saw my name in the subject line. It was from the same travel company I'd used months earlier to book and then cancel Lila's Hawaii trip. At first, I assumed it was another promotional offer. They'd been relentless ever since I'd racked up enough points to qualify as a preferred client. But this one wasn't generic. The word confirmation sat there in bold. I opened it and my stomach tightened. It wasn't my trip. It was hers. A week-long, all-inclusive Caribbean vacation. 2 passengers, ocean view suite, prepaid excursions. Departure date less than 2 weeks away. And there it was at the bottom of the email, clear as day. Payment method, Serena Caldwell. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, waiting for it to make sense. I'd changed my passwords. I'd locked the account. I'd answered new security questions that even I struggled to remember. And yet, somehow, Lila had gotten back in. Same playbook, different destination. Still expecting me to pay. Daniel watched my face change and went quiet. What is it? He asked. She did it again, I said, turning the laptop so he could see. She booked another trip on my card. He didn't react the way I expected. No anger, no suggestions. He just nodded slowly. What are you going to do? That was the moment I realized how different this felt from last time. The first time, canceling the Hawaii trip had been about reclaiming control, about stopping the humiliation, about finally saying no. This time it wasn't fueled by shock or adrenaline. It was almost clinical. I could cancel it immediately. I knew exactly how. 20 minutes, maybe less. A few clicks and it would be gone, just like Hawaii. She'd run to our mother. She'd cry to anyone who would listen. She'd paint herself as the victim again. Predictable. Instead, I closed the laptop. I'm going to let it happen, I said. Just not for her. Daniel studied me for a second, then smiled. That sounds dangerous. No, I replied calmly. It sounds final. Over the next few days, I made calls. I contacted the resort first, confirmed the booking under my payment, then requested a change to the guest names. The front desk didn't care. The room was paid in full. Names were just names. I did the same with the excursions, the catamaran sunset cruise, the snorkeling tour, the couple's spa package, all transferred without a single question. The new guests were Jack and Marlene, the retired couple who lived 3 houses down from us. They'd always been kind, the kind of neighbors who waved from their porch and brought our packages inside when it rained. Jack once mentioned, casually, that they'd never been able to afford the kind of vacation they'd dreamed about when they were younger. Life had always gotten in the way. When I told them they were going to the Caribbean, ocean view, all-inclusive, excursions included, Marlene cried. Jack laughed for a full minute, convinced I was joking, until I handed him the printed confirmation. The only thing left was the flights. I waited. The night before departure, after Jack and Marlene had already booked their own flights using frequent flyer miles, I canceled the airline tickets tied to my account and processed the refund back to my card. Perfect timing. At 6:42 a.m. the next morning, my phone started ringing. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. Then came the texts. The tickets are gone. The airline says they were canceled. The hotel says we're not on the list. Call me right now. I didn't answer. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a photo from Marlene. She and Jack were standing on their balcony, tropical drinks in hand, the Caribbean sunset exploding behind them in gold and pink. The caption read, "Best trip of our lives. Thank you, Serena." I saved the photo, printed it, put it in a frame on the bookshelf in our living room where I could see it every day. The fallout was exactly what I expected, and completely different at the same time. Lila tried to rally in the family again, but no one took the bait. Too many people remembered the wedding cake video. Too many remembered the airport stunt. Some even told her, directly, that she'd brought this on herself. The new boyfriend didn't last. From what I heard, he disappeared less than 2 weeks later, uninterested in a relationship that required him to explain why his girlfriend kept trying to steal vacations. My mother didn't mention the trip at all. When we spoke, she was polite, careful, civil in the way people get when they realize the power dynamic has shifted and there's no going back. And me? I noticed something remarkable. The requests stopped. The emergencies vanished. The guilt evaporated. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the family safety net. And I didn't miss it. Jack and Marlene stopped by twice after they got back, bringing souvenirs and stories, laughing so hard they cried as they talked about the trip. Watching them relive those moments felt better than any revenge fantasy ever could. Because the real victory wasn't taking something away from my sister. It was giving it to someone who deserved it. If Lila ever tries again, I know she'll be ready with the same entitlement, the same assumptions, the same belief that I'll always clean up after her. And I'll be ready too. But something tells me she won't. Silence, it turns out, is very expensive when you're used to living off someone else's generosity.